We have set ourselves back on the trail against the fiercest demons this side of Old Draenor, and with no ability to fly, we're going to attempt to travel 7 terrains of a broken world to see if it's possible or if we're at the end of the rope for this challenge. Stick around to see the outcome and our first 10 out of 10 difficulty for our exploration. Previously, we've settled 2 zones under our belt and reached level 20 due to those explorations, so comment below what we'll be getting today. But this one will have unforeseen difficulties as Outlands is the epitome of needing flying to get to specific locations. Still, it's time for us to give it a go and start with the burnt hellscape of this world, Hellfire Peninsula. A broken introduction to kickstart the demonic invasion, the peninsula is home to the Fel Orc Citadel and the prison of the former demonic leader Magtheridon. For our purposes, the biggest issue to rival them on is not Magtheridon, but his boss, Kil'jaeden, specifically the throne of Kil'jaeden. The rest of the zone pales in comparison in trying to find a way to the top of this ridge, and while you give it a valiant effort, it stands tall, laughing at you for trying to get a good vantage point. I tried all sorts of things to get this one under my belt, from letting a succubus hit me to death, to using an exploit to set up a turnip as a charging point to scale upside the hill. Before it resulted in a stupid death, as I forgot that Outland zones don't have the flight mechanic automatically instilled. At the same time, the latter likely seems patched out by Blizzard to have it set up to where you can put the turnip higher than your location. Jumping off the side was also not an option, as there is no graveyard in the throne of Kil'jaeden, or at least not one I could access. Research proved difficult to give me a conclusive data without getting help. So, for the first time on this network, we will have to leave a zone unfinished and let the fog of war sit as it will. I still finished the rest of the zone quickly, but for that spot alone, I'll give this place a 9 out of 10 as it remains unfinished without flying. One place does deserve the full points, which we'll see soon. We wrap up our attempts in Hellfire and slink through Terracard to end up at the entrance of Shadowmoon Valley. You might have thought this would be the most brutal zone on the map, and while I sympathize with you, there is one place far worse than this hellhole. Still, being a level 25 exclusive zone, there are bound to be some tight spots in this layout with some potentially killer mobs that will want you to submit your will to them. But the worst part about this place is the home of the exclusive dragonkin, the Netherwings. They have their own... an island! It's coming full circle! They have an exclusive island, and while you think that's a prestige for those only willing to suffer through a daily grind, they are also the bane of any explorer who dares trek on foot. Your best bet, if any, is to try to ride up and jump as far as possible to get the credit, because no rock will save you from this place to break your fall. And guess what? That's impossible. In theory, you could jump pretty far out, maybe, but this explorer, at least for now, can't do that either. Once again, frustrated and without a prayer, we head back to the one flight path in this zone, giving Shadowmoon a 9 out of 10 in difficulty because the one island off to the side. After giving it our all, we fly back to Illyrian Point with a time of 48 minutes or 20 minutes after our attempt in Hellfire Peninsula. Terrakar's Forest awaits. So with 2 failures under our belt, what about Terrakar? Are we about to make a hat trick in this fickle world? Let's find out together. The layout itself already provides a challenge, as there are spots on this map where it is confusing regarding locations to stand and discover. You could be standing in the middle of war fog and still not have explored it unless you're specifically in the 1 pixel you're supposed to be at. What's more, however, is that there is not 1, but 2 locations you're allegedly not supposed to be able to get to without taking flight and your shiny new ability. The first is Skedis in the southwestern location. Usually this location is entirely off limits to any player who can't ride up the mountainside via your mountain wings. However, I'm here to inform you that you'd be wrong if you think I'm giving up that easy. As an explorer, I am honor bound to give anything a shot, even if it costs me my sanity. And this challenge may be the most complex, most desperate need to prove to all of you that I can scale the mountaintops. And if you run right here, you can get to the mountains, which will give you credit for Skedis. Come on. There wasn't a faction city, so I needed this joke to come in somewhere. Yes, the range is surprisingly comprehensive for Skedis, despite the rest of the zone setting you up for a specific spot while marking your map and uncovering the fog of war. Still, we have a second spot that may prove even more challenging. Barrier Hills is an ogre-infested part of Terrakar that sits just atop the outskirts of Shattrath City. A spot for exclusively flying players, this will require a trek up the mountainside to even stand a chance of to get to the ledge here and claim our crown against these large-bellied freaks! Or... and hear me out on this, we could just walk over to the closest edge of the mountain and claim our credit that way too. You know, because I'd rather do that. So, I'm going to go ahead and do that instead. Now, how to rate this one? Well, if you don't know where to look for these 2 spots, it could be more difficult, but as it is possible and requires minimal effort, we'll give it a 7 out of 10. Escaping through the Aldor exit of Shattrath, we finished Terrakar at 1 hour and 7 minutes or 19 minutes after we've attempted Shadowmoon Valley. Our escape leads us to our 4th zone in Nagrand. We've got 1 success under our belt. Let's see if Nagrand in all of its beauty can keep us from another heartbreak, shall we? Now Nagrand, compared to most of our hellscape zones, seems to give the player a break from the eternal struggle of difficult places to get to. if you're blind. Of course, they'd have to make it to where at least one spot was only accessible to flyers who took the time to get their money for the exclusive content for their efforts. Twilight Sledge seems like another designated block of zones for those willing to do a quest to find themselves up top dealing with the issues of demonic activity. But just because it's intended for one thing doesn't mean that the programming is perfect, and a little patience and parkour may get you your desired results. Unlike Terracar, this spot is a little more tricky to reach, but some research revealed that the outer cliff face has a pixel where you can get the credit you desire. So, here's how. Step 1. Find a rock near a waterfall that lightly drives up the second it enters the twisting nether. Step 2. Smoosh your face along the left side of the cliff as best as possible and gingerly move your character right until finding that spot that lets you go up. Keeping in mind that if you overshoot too far to the right, you're going to meet an inevitable demise, lost to time and space. And step 3, rinse and repeat your manipulation of rocks until you eventually get to your solo spot. You'll get close enough to get to the spot of Twilight Sledge and get your marker. To get back, merely turn around and do the same motion, hugging the rocks to the right, or if you're looking for another spot, you can just jump off the side of this point and resurrect at the graveyard. Either way, you'll find the rest of the Grand a pleasurable adventure once you get past this point. So difficulty-wise, we'll still give the zone an 8 out of 10 because if you're not careful on the Twilight Sledge, you may find yourself flying out the side a few times before getting your positioning. But as it isn't an intense run or overly easy, I'll give it points for making me think rather than roam. Arriving at the Windy Reed Pass gives us our ticket to Zangar Marsh in at 1 hour and 29 minutes or 22 minutes after Terracar Forest. And so we're on a roll, and the Mushroom Kingdom of WoW isn't looking like it's going to take us out of limbo anytime soon. Here's the thing, while most zones have a designated flyboy location or quest spot in mind that requires wings to make your way upwards, Zangar Marsh isn't one of those spots. You can roam every bit of it without a single care. The hardest part in this is wait a minute, that's a water chugging device. There we go, an island, baby! Still, because it lacks much substance and its layout is easy to comprehend, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. The lowest on this list because even chokehold spots aren't a thing at this marsh. So let's move on to something more interesting after marking Zangar Marsh's time at 1 hour and 48 minutes or 19 minutes after the Grand. Now, as much as I'd love to talk to you all about Blade's Edge, and believe me, we'll get to it, I feel like I'm going to save it until just a bit later. You'll understand why soon enough, but no, I spent around 45 minutes in this zone. If that doesn't pique your curiosity, I don't know what will. For now though, I'm going to go ahead and talk about Netherstorm first. And I'm not about to cave in even if the whole map is a bunch of islands. Now, 2 spots likely come to your mind for curiosity. The first one is Tempest Keep, and yes, while it is impossible to get there without flying, exploring isn't nearly as difficult. So long as you stand at the rift, your character stares at it, looks at their map, and goes, I guess that's where Kelthus lives. Meanwhile, I'm running around Terracar trying to find the solo pixel. Damn you, Blizzard. Anyway, Tempest Keep isn't the issue in Netherstorm. On the other hand, there is another spot named Sokrathar's Rise that isn't as simple. Of course, this had to be another, you guessed it, island that decided it needed to exist in a way for flyers and questers to show off their prestige. And I guess for the foot explorer, staring at them will have to be your most notable achievement. Now, there are a couple sources that say you can land on a rock below and then run towards the cliff edge on this said floating rock. But don't believe a second of it. Most of the structures around here are mere illusions and props used to give it a more realistic feel. Meaning if you try to fall and land on it, you're gonna fall straight through a rock and wonder how that's even physically possible. Everything else is a matter of following a bridge to make it happen, but after a couple of unsuccessful attempts at this landmass, I'll give it a 9 out of 10, similar to Shadow Moon and the Hellfire Peninsula. So after 3 hours or 28 minutes, Netherstorm is a wrap, and we're left heading back home to rest. Or that would be the end, but I promised we'd talk about Blade Edge Mountains. After all, it's a zone 2, right? Well, after going through it, you'll understand why this zone deserves the rating I'm going to give it. Be rest assured. Now, I could have made an entire video just about Blade's Edge and why it's an absolute hard hitter for anyone looking to do this challenge without flying. But for your sake and mine, I'll cover the tedious bits in brief and then the outright ludicrous parts in detail. Essentially, the mountains are layered on top of one another, which wouldn't be bad, but the ways to get out of each chasm aren't the most accessible. So you've got to try to be smart going through here if you want it done efficiently. That means likely exploring one layer, then climbing up to the next, and then the third, each of which has separate, completely spread out zones on the map. And that's just the terrain you can explore without using exploits. I wish I had a guide on hand to tell you to get the most efficient way possible, but even I had to make some twists and turns that caused me to go back into spots I'd already explored to get another location. That alone would give this zone 7 or 8 out of 10 in difficulty, but there are not 1, but 2 flight path spots here you must contend with. And unlike the other flight spots where there's only one part of the exploration map, these 2 have 5 locations you need to complete the expedition. Now, for all its faults, there are silver linings to note. Some graveyards exist conveniently in these locations of the map. In theory, getting to these locations without flying is possible if you know where to die. Yes, by the way, you must die to get to these spots, otherwise you aren't getting to them. Now, for the first one, I did lie a little bit. A mage, priest, and possibly a demon hunter could cheese their way up here without flying or dying, but for the rest of us, it's a matter of finding the right spot to fall from and getting the release point to the graveyard above. Thankfully, I found the spot right on the cliff face of the Crystal Spine. Slightly jump off the cliff, release, and bring yourself to the graveyard above, where you can explore said spine and Bashir's Landing. For the second spot, however, straddle in and listen to this. There is a chance to spawn at a graveyard of Okrala, a small village for an Apexis quest at the top of this mountainside. To do this, you need to, and follow me on this, go back to Zangarmarsh, run around the side as far as you can, and then make a jump into the void as far as you can go to both ensure you're in Blade Edge Mountains and that you're far enough away from any other graveyards to ensure you're not releasing at them. Now, I've read that for Horde, this is much easier, because for Horde members, there isn't a city near enough for you to get forced from Okrala. So once you jump off, you're assured a spot to this place where you can explore your final 3 zones. But for Alliance, well, you'd only get so lucky now, wouldn't you? If you do try to do this as an Alliance player, Sylvanar is the whole reason you need to be as far out as possible. Otherwise, when you release, you have a high chance of returning to Sylvanar instead of Okrala. And from the many attempts I did at this, I ended up at Sylvanar each time. This means I had to eventually abandon the mission of jumping into the void or risk being stuck there for a long time. So in other words, this is the most markers on the map I've had to relinquish up to this point. And for that reason, I relented and went ahead and tried to finish out the rest of Blade Edge Mountains, knowing that this would be my first spot I'd give a full 10 out of 10 difficulty points. At around 2 hours and 32 minutes or 44 minutes after Zangarmarsh, we moved on to Netherstorm. Now, with 4 failed zones on our marks, you might ask, is the challenge failed? And honestly, I can't answer that question as of yet. What I can say is, it depends. We could fly back here and finish these locations if we get to level 30 before concluding the other zones. And by the way, on the topic of flying, I'll only be doing it if a spot is impossible to reach otherwise, or if I'm going in between zones as a more of a convenience to get to locations than anything else. So don't worry, we'll be keeping on foot for the most part if it does happen. But some of you might be wondering, how did this all start? And how did we get here? Well, you'll want to check the video on screen for that answer after commenting your predictions of today's levels down below.